Welcome to Stories for Sleep, a space of slow storytelling where science is not used to overwhelm but to soothe. On this channel, we share gentle, thoughtful scientific stories, carefully selected and guided with a rhythm suitable for listening before sleep. There is no pressure to remember, no requirement to understand everything, only ideas spacious enough for your mind to rest within them. In today's video, the most fascinating facts about planets to help you fall asleep. We will quietly step away from the familiar rhythm of Earth and softly observe other worlds drifting through the universe. Planets so hot that metal evaporates, worlds without day and night, orbits that last longer than a human lifetime, and planets so unfamiliar that they remind us what we call normal is merely a human habit, not a law of the cosmos. From the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, contemplating the universe is not only an outward gaze, but also a journey inward. When the ego no longer stands at the center, the mind begins to loosen. When we recognize that we are only a very small part of a much larger order, an invisible burden slowly sets itself down. So listen to this video as you would listen to a flowing stream. If you grow sleepy halfway through, that is perfectly right. If you do not remember everything you hear, that is also very good. Your only task right now is to lie still, breathe slowly, and allow these stories of distant planets to gently carry you into sleep. As night falls and the sounds of the day gradually fade, the human mind does not seek more stimulation, it seeks spaciousness. Yet in the modern world, even as we prepare to sleep, we remain surrounded by repetitive thoughts and small but persistent worries, turning sleep into a difficult journey. The problem is not that you are not tired enough, but that the ego is still trying to cling to the center of everything. In this video, we will gently step away from that center, not by forcing ourselves to relax, but by expanding our view into the universe. Distant, strange, and almost surreal planets become doorways that lead you beyond the familiar boundaries of everyday thought. As you listen to worlds where metal evaporates like mist, where one side of a planet lies forever in darkness, or to wandering planets with no sun at all, your mind begins to do what it has always known how to do very well: let go. From a Jungian perspective, contemplating outer worlds is not only scientific exploration but also an inner journey. The universe in all its extreme diversity reflects deep archetypal images within the collective unconscious light and darkness order and chaos center and periphery. As you listen to these stories of planets, you may notice that you do not need to understand everything. You only need to be there, allowing your mind to drift with the slow rhythm of space. This video is not meant to astonish or overwhelm you. It was created to lull you with vastness, to remind you that your personal worries are real, but that you do not need to carry the weight of the entire universe. And as you continue listening, each planet, each orbit, each distant measure of time will gently guide you away from familiar thoughts and closer to a deep, peaceful, and natural sleep. 1. The extreme diversity of worlds. Under the quiet night sky, when the light in the room has softened and the breath has begun to slow, thinking about distant planets often brings a very particular feeling, at once overwhelming and comforting. In this first part, the extreme diversity of worlds is not told as a dry scientific list, but as a whisper that gently draws the listener away from the unconscious habit of believing that one's own world is the standard. Among the countless things humans call normal, the universe quietly reveals that normality is in fact rare. There are planets so hot that metal is no longer solid, but evaporates like a thin mist. Their iron, sodium, even rock itself can no longer hold a familiar shape. Seen through ordinary eyes, such worlds resemble hellscapes, But when listened to with the inward attitude of an evening before sleep, they can be felt as pure expressions of energy, places where matter returns closer to the universe's most primordial state. In symbolic language, fire and heat are always linked with transformation. On planets hotter than stars, we are not only observing astrophysics, we are also encountering a deep metaphor. There are regions within the human psyche that are just as hot places where emotion, desire, and fear have not yet cooled, not yet crystallized into clear thought. Then there are worlds of glass, rain, metal, snow, ruby, and sapphire clouds, images that sound more like strange dreams than reality. Winds there can sweep sharp shards of glass horizontally across the sky, not falling downward but slicing sideways through the atmosphere. Metals do not lie quietly beneath the ground but condense and fall like snow. Light refracts through mineral clouds to create colors Earth has never seen. Such images dissolve the mind's habit of labeling things as beautiful or ugly, safe or dangerous. The universe is indifferent to human feeling. It merely expresses possibilities. And paradoxically, this indifference is deeply relaxing. When the world does not need to serve us, we no longer need to control it. There are planets completely covered by water ocean worlds with no continents, no shorelines, no place to stand. Only deep water following deeper water pressure, increasing darkness thickening with every kilometer. These planets evoke a very ancient archetypal image. The ocean as the birthplace of life, but also as that which dissolves all boundaries. From the perspective of Carl Gustav Jung, the ocean often appears in dreams as a symbol of the unconscious, deep, vast, bottomless, and never fully controllable. When listening to descriptions of ocean planets, the listener is not only imagining water and pressure, but is also unconsciously touching the deeper layers within themselves, where unnamed emotions and memories drift silently. In contrast to these watery worlds are planets darker than coal, or so bright that they reflect starlight like mirrors. On extremely dark planets, light is almost entirely swallowed. They do not shimmer, do not display themselves. They simply exist as dense voids in space. Meanwhile, mirror-bright planets return nearly all the light they receive, keeping nothing for themselves. These two extremes resemble two ways the human mind sometimes operates, either holding everything tightly within or reflecting everything outward. Neither is wrong, they are simply different survival strategies under different conditions. Then there are the so-called puffy planets, unusually swollen yet astonishingly light. They occupy vast space, but their mass is far less than their appearance suggests. From a distance they seem enormous, but if one could touch them, they would feel fragile, easily deformed, easily stripped away by stellar winds. This is one of the gentlest images to hear before sleep, because it softly reminds us that not everything large is heavy. Some structures exist primarily through delicate balance rather than strength. And this too is true of the human psyche. Sometimes what appears solid only needs a very small environmental change to lose its shape entirely. At the opposite extreme are ultra-dense planets, where matter is compressed so tightly that iron can be crushed like powder. Gravity there is so intense that all structures must bow under its weight. These planets evoke heaviness, pressure, and an uncompromising force. Yet even there, they continue to exist, to maintain their orbits, to remain part of a larger order. When listening to them in a relaxed state, the listener may unconsciously realize that there are periods in life that feel the same times when pressure becomes so intense it seems unbearable. And yet, like these ultra-dense planets, a person can still exist, still hold their form, even when everything has been compressed to its limit. The central message of this section, normal is only an exception in the universe, is not meant to make us feel lost, but rather to soften the need to conform. When we realize that Earth, with its temperate climate, balanced day and night, liquid water and stable atmosphere, is itself a rarity, a very gentle sense of gratitude may arise. Not a loud gratitude, but a quiet settling, the feeling of living within a fragile yet miraculous arrangement. And as these descriptions are heard before sleep, the mind gradually loosens its grip on the narrow worries of the day. It opens, expands, and blends into a much larger picture. In that picture, there is no absolute right or wrong, no rigid standard. There are only countless ways for a world to exist. It is precisely this extreme diversity that paradoxically creates a sense of safety. If the universe can contain all these differences, perhaps it is also spacious enough to hold your very human fatigue, anxieties, and fragility, and allow them to rest at least for tonight. As we move through the extreme diversity of worlds, where metals can evaporate, oceans can cover entire surfaces, and normal is only a rare exception, a very natural question begins to arise in the mind, especially as we slowly relax in preparation for sleep. A light sunrise and the familiar rhythm of day and night, truly essential conditions for existence. The universe answers in a very quiet voice, not necessarily. And from there, we step into an even quieter space, worlds without a sun, without morning, without familiar sunsets, and sometimes without the very concept of day at all. 2. Worlds without a sun and without day and night. In human experience, day and night form the most fundamental rhythm. We wake when it is light and rest when it is dark. Our psychological, biological, and emotional sense of time all revolves around this cycle. Yet in the vast universe, this rhythm is not a universal law. It is only one possibility among countless others. There are planets that are tidally locked. One side forever faces their parent star, bathed in relentless light and heat, while the other remains submerged in cold, eternal darkness. In such places, there is no sunrise to begin a new day, and no sunset to close a cycle. Time is not felt through changing light, but through slower movements. The circulation of the atmosphere, the creeping flow of heat across the surface, or the fragile stability of a very narrow band, the delicate twilight zone between light, dark. This twilight zone is so distinctive that in scientific imagination it is often considered the place where life might exist. Not too hot to burn, not too cold to freeze completely. A narrow strip encircling the planet, where conditions are just enough, not perfect but possible. When listening about such regions before sleep, it is easy for the listener to recognize a familiar image in inner life. We too often live in the twilight zones of ourselves, not fully illuminated, not completely immersed in darkness, simply an in-between state, sufficient to exist and to continue. From a symbolic perspective, the permanent division between day and night on tidally locked planets evokes a structure Carl Gustav Jung described so often, the tension between consciousness and the shadow. One side is always illuminated, what we acknowledge, control, and present outwardly. The other is pushed into darkness, drives memories and emotions that are not recognized. Yet it is precisely at the boundary between these two sides that psychological life finds its chance for stability, not by eliminating the darkness, but by accepting life alongside it. Even farther away are rogue planets, wandering worlds that orbit no star at all. They drift freely through interstellar space, with no sunrise, no sunset, no central reference point. At first glance, they seem lonely and cold. Yet science suggests that even such worlds may retain internal heat, harbor subsurface oceans beneath thick ice, and possess their own histories of formation and change. This image carries a very quiet comfort. It whispers that the absence of a center does not mean the absence of value. A world not warmed by a parent star can still exist, still move, still hold its own story. In inner life, this reflects periods when a person feels ungrounded, when old values and familiar anchors no longer function. Yet, like rogue planets, the psyche can still sustain inner life, waiting for a new form of stability to emerge. Stranger still are planets orbiting dead stars, white dwarfs, neutron stars, pulsars, the remnants of once brilliant suns. The light there is not warm, not gentle, sometimes only precise, cold pulses. And yet within these systems, planets still follow orbits, still respond to gravity, still live in their own way. This gently unsettles a very deep human belief that life can only arise around fresh, vibrant sources of energy. The universe suggests another possibility that even after a center has died, order may continue. In psychological terms, this resembles how people continue to live, love, and grow, even after great losses when an essential part of life has gone dark. A key point of this section lies in a very soft assertion. Even without light or sunrise, a planet can still have history, movement, and the capacity to exist. This is not a shocking statement. It does not challenge or deny. It simply expands. And it is this expansion that soothes the mind. For when heard before sleep, it may unconsciously allow the listener to release the pressure of having to be always bright, always clear, always moving forward. If the universe accepts worlds without day and night, perhaps the human mind can also accept periods that are dim, quiet, and without direction. In the state of preparing for sleep, this section functions as a deep reassurance. Darkness is not the absence of life. It is simply another way of existing. Not every process requires light. Some movements occur only in silence. Some histories are written without a dawn. And as you lie there, between softened light and a slowing breath, you may notice that your own sleep resembles these worlds. In sleep, there is no external light, no day or night in the familiar sense. Yet the mind continues to move, memories are reorganized, and a very personal history quietly continues to be written in darkness, but never in emptiness. After listening to these worlds without a sun, without sunrise or sunset, the listener's mind often enters a very particular state, a sense that the stability we are accustomed to is in truth a fragile exception. When day and night are no longer the foundational rhythm of the universe, when light is no longer a prerequisite for existence, we begin to glimpse a deeper layer of cosmic truth. Not only is light relative, but planets themselves are never truly fixed. And from here, the story drifts gently into an even wider awareness that planets are not immutable stones drifting silently through space, but dynamic systems endlessly forming, transforming, and dissolving. 3. Planets as dynamic systems, not eternal entities. In the common human imagination, planets are often pictured as places, destinations, stable surfaces, landscapes that can remain still while we observe them. Yet modern science, together with the symbolic perspective of depth psychology, quietly tells a different story. Planets are not nouns, but verbs. Each planet exists in a temporary state, even if that temporary phase lasts millions or billions of years. Some are slowly eroded by stellar radiation, their atmospheres stripped away layer by layer like breath carried off by the cosmic wind. There are planets so hot that metals vaporize where the surface is no longer solid rock but oceans of molten iron endlessly reshaping themselves. Other worlds are so cold that gas molecules nearly stand still, making time itself seem to slow. Some planets do not end quietly, but conclude their lives in dramatic descents, gradually drawn inward by gravity toward their parent stars, their orbits tightening in a slow spiral dance until they dissolve in blinding light. Others are violently flung from their systems by gravitational interactions, becoming wandering planets without a center, without an anchor, carrying only the inertia of a lost past. Yet what makes this story gentle rather than tragic lies here. Disintegration is not an ending. In the universe, the remnants of old worlds often become the material for new ones. Dust, rock, ice, metal, all may gather again, collide, bind, and slowly form another planet. There is no clear boundary between birth and death, between ending and beginning. There are only slow cycles of transformation. This idea resonates deeply with the thought of Carl Gustav Jung, who emphasized that the human psyche does not develop in a straight line, but through spirals and cycles. Jung wrote in Modern Man in Search of a Soul, life really does begin at 40. Up until then, you are just doing research. This sentence speaks not merely of age, but of process. What we call a complete person does not appear fully formed, but is shaped through countless attempts, errors, collapses, and restructurings. Planets are the same. They are not created and then left unchanged. They are continually becoming themselves. Some planets are being born even now, in swirling disks of dust around young stars. Matter collides, clumps together, breaks apart, and clumps again. There is no perfect blueprint from the beginning, only the long experimentation of nature. Some planets are still growing slowly, cooling, gradually stabilizing, like a living being passing into maturity. And some worlds are fading, being stripped away, consumed, or fragmented into pieces that can no longer gather again. When these ideas are heard before sleep, listeners often feel not anxiety, but relief. Because if even planets are not destinations, perhaps humans do not need to force themselves to reach a final, perfect, or stable state. The thought that a planet is not a destination but a process quietly opens an inner permission, the permission to be unfinished. In Jung's analysis, the concept of individuation, the process of becoming oneself, is never truly complete. It has no finish line. Just as a planet never reaches a final, finished state, the human soul is always in motion, restructuring and adapting. Psychological phases of disintegration, loss of direction, crisis, exhaustion are not failures but necessary conditions for new structures to emerge. What makes this section especially suitable for listening before sleep is its rhythm. There is no climax, no definitive conclusion, only very slow movements, planets eroding, planets forming, planets drifting. This rhythm aligns with the brain's state as it approaches sleep, when conscious control loosens and deeper processes begin their work. Listening to worlds being born and dissolving gently helps the mind release its fixation on control. Not everything must be held together. Not every structure must be preserved. Some things must fall apart so that new space can appear. Some cycles must close so others may begin. And perhaps, in the moment when your eyes are closing and your breath is slowing, you too are entering a similar process. Consciousness briefly dissolves, making room for deeper movements of the mind. Sleep like a planet is not a destination, but a transformation, a place where the fragments of today are rearranged so a new structure can form by morning. There is nothing to rush, nothing that must be completed right now. In the universe of planets, and in your own inner space, everything is unfolding at its proper pace, and simply drifting with that rhythm is already enough to let you sink into a deep, gentle, and safe sleep. When we accept that planets are not immutable objects, but ongoing processes, the listener's mind begins to drift toward a deeper, slower question. If everything is in motion, by what rhythm does it move? Here, the story no longer revolves around shape, structure, or the birth and death of planets, but quietly opens onto a deeper foundation time. Not the time of clocks, schedules, or human routines, but the time of worlds, of orbits, of cycles, so vast that human consciousness can scarcely grasp them in full. 4. Planetary time is different from human time. Human beings live within a very narrow frame of time. A day has 24 hours a year, has 365 days, and a human life rarely exceeds a century. The entire structure of our psychology, our memories, plans, and anxieties is built upon this rhythm. But when we step beyond Earth, when we listen to the stories of other planets, we begin to realize that time is not a universal measure shared by all forms of existence. There are planets that orbit their stars in just a few hours. A single year on such a world passes more quickly than a human afternoon nap. On these planets, sunrise and sunset rush by at dizzying speed, and the very idea of stability nearly disappears. By contrast, there are planets that take centuries, sometimes even thousands of years, to complete one orbit. On these worlds, a single season can last longer than a human lifetime, and change unfolds so slowly it becomes almost invisible. Some planetary systems have existed for billions of years before Earth was even formed. They have witnessed generations of stars being born and dying, cosmic structures expanding and contracting, rivers of matter flowing like vast tides. In that context, human history, with all its wars, inventions, anxieties, and hopes, resembles only a tiny ripple on the surface of the ocean of time. This image, time as an ocean, is especially fitting to hear before sleep. The ocean does not rush. It does not count seconds. It moves according to deep, slow rhythms far beyond the control of any individual. Cosmic time is the same. It does not hurry, does not demand, does not insist on being on schedule. It simply flows. This perspective resonates strongly with the thought of Carl Gustav Jung, who believed that much of human psychological suffering arises when the ego tries to impose its own rhythm upon the deeper processes of the soul. Jung wrote in Memories, Dreams, Reflections, we cannot live the afternoon of life according to the program of life's morning. This statement speaks not only of age, but of misalignment. When people attempt to live by rigid schedules while their inner psychology is moving according to different cycles, conflict arises. In the same way, when we measure cosmic time using human standards, we easily feel too small, too slow, or too late. But in the gentle storytelling space before sleep, that sense of smallness is no longer frightening. It becomes comforting. For if the universe's time is this vast, then failing to complete something today is no tragedy. If there are seasons on distant planets that last longer than a human life, then needing more time to rest, to heal, to let go, becomes entirely natural. In Jungian analysis, sleep is precisely the moment when humans temporarily step out of the linear time of consciousness and return to the cyclical time of the unconscious. Their past, present, and future are no longer sharply divided. Memories may appear as images, intuitions may arise as symbols, and the mind is allowed to drift like a planet, quietly turning in its orbit, unconcerned with whether anyone is watching. As you listen to planets whose years last thousands of years, your brain begins to adjust its own rhythm. Thoughts slow down. The pressure to finish, to keep up, to be on time, gradually dissolves. Time ceases to be a force that pushes you and becomes a space wide enough for you to exist without effort. And perhaps that is the greatest gift of contemplating cosmic time before sleep. It does not tell you what to do. It simply whispers that you are already moving at the right pace for yourself. Like the planets, you too have your own cycles, seasons, and orbits. No comparison is needed. No acceleration is required. No measurement is necessary. In this ocean of time, you are only a moment, but a moment that is allowed to rest. And as consciousness gently settles as your breath aligns with the slow rhythm of the story, you may allow human time to temporarily close, making room for another kind of time, softer, deeper, the time of sleep. When the time of planets has opened before us like a slow-moving ocean, the mind gradually becomes familiar with the idea that there is no single correct rhythm for all existence. And from this feeling of time, another question quietly arises. If each planet has its own temporal rhythm, then how do many planets coexist together? The answer is not found in a rigid diagram, but in something far more subtle, the architecture of planetary systems, where order and deviation coexist like a piece of music that contains both harmony and meaningful dissonance. 5. The architecture of planetary systems from harmony to chaos. From a distance, planetary systems can appear like perfectly calculated architectures. Repeating orbits, regular cycles, distances that seem just right to prevent collisions. But when observed more deeply, science reveals that the universe does not prioritize neatness. It prioritizes existence. And in order to exist, order and chaos must learn to live together. There are planetary systems that operate in resonance, where the orbits of planets are linked like musical notes in a chord. When one planet completes 2 revolutions, another completes exactly 3. These simple ratios create long-term stability, much like a piece of music held in precise rhythm. In such systems, motion is not merely mechanical. It carries an almost aesthetic, quality movement for its own sake, requiring no audience. Alongside these, there are systems so crowded they seem almost impossible. Many worlds are packed into a narrow region of space, their orbits lying close together, gravitational forces constantly overlapping. Here, stability does not come from safe distance, but from continuous adjustment. The planets listen to one another through gravity, constantly fine-tuning their paths to avoid collision, a silent dialogue lasting millions of years. Then there are solitary systems, just one planet orbiting its star, with no siblings, no resonance, no complex interaction. This simplicity is not a deficiency, but a different structure. Just as in human psychology, some structures flourish in relationship, while others develop best in solitude. Most striking of all are the irregular orbits, planets with extreme axial tilts, planets that rotate backward, even worlds where the sun rises in the west. These deviations were once considered anomalies, but are now understood as natural expressions of cosmic diversity. There is no single blueprint for a correct planetary system. It is here that the cosmic story touches deeply upon the depth psychology of Carl Gustav Jung. Jung believed that the human psyche also does not operate according to a single architecture. Some people live harmoniously within stable structures. Others only grow by accepting inner chaos. In The Structure and Dynamics of the Psyche, he wrote, "The psyche is a self-regulating system that maintains its equilibrium just as the body does." This self-regulation does not mean eliminating chaos, but discovering how chaos and order can coexist. A resilient planetary system is not one without disturbance, but one that can absorb disturbance without collapsing. The same is true of the human psyche. A healthy inner life is not free of conflict, but spacious enough for conflict to reorganize itself. When listening to this section before sleep, many people feel a gentle sense of recognition. In daily life, we are often preoccupied with the need to be stable, to be on track, to be balanced. But the universe whispers something else. Balance is not stillness. It is movement that remains flexible enough not to break. A planetary system may tilt, deviate, reverse direction, and still endure for billions of years. A human being may move slowly, take detours, even go against expectations, and still live a full life. In this gentle storytelling space, the universe does not judge. It simply presents. What makes the architecture of planetary systems especially sleep-inducing is the blend of order and surprise. There is no shock, no climax, only the feeling that everything has its place, even the irregularities. And when the mind recognizes this, it no longer needs to grip control so tightly. You may allow your thoughts to settle like a planet finding its own orbit again. You do not need to resemble anyone else. You do not need to follow a single map. The universe is wide enough to contain both harmony and chaos. And in this moment before sleep, you too are allowed to become part of that architecture. Unfinished perhaps, but functioning in your own unique way. As the architecture of planetary systems gradually reveals itself as a harmony that includes deviation, the human mind reaches a natural boundary. We cannot step into these systems. We cannot touch those worlds. And at this very boundary, a deeper question arises, no longer about how the universe operates, but about how humans have learned to perceive what lies beyond touch. From the harmony of orbits, the story quietly shifts into something more contemplative, and just as wondrous, the journey of perception itself, where science becomes a modern form of meditation. 6. How humans see worlds they can never touch. Human beings have never set foot on planets beyond the solar system. We cannot smell their atmospheres, touch their surfaces, or feel their gravity with our bodies. And yet paradoxically, we know more about them than ever before. Not through physical presence, but through delicate attention to very small signs, vibrations, shadows, and variations in light that are almost imperceptible. The first method sounds deceptively simple. Observing the faint dimming of starlight when a planet passes in front of its star. For a very brief moment, the star's light decreases by only a tiny fraction. There is no image of the planet, no color, only a subtle dip in the data. And yet, from that slight absence of light, humans can infer the planet's size, its orbital period, and even aspects of its atmospheric structure. This is no longer seeing in the ordinary sense, it is listening to the absence of light. Then there is the method of measuring the gravitational wobble of the host star. A planet orbiting a star is not only pulled inward, it pulls back. The star shifts ever so slightly like an uneven breath. From this gentle motion, humans deduce the mass of an unseen planet. This is a rare form of perception, seeing what cannot be seen through the movement of what is visible. When starlight passes through a planet's atmosphere, it carries a chemical signature, dark lines, missing bands in the spectrum. Without touching the atmosphere, humans can know whether it contains water vapor, methane, or carbon dioxide. In this case, light becomes a faithful messenger telling the story of distant worlds in an ancient language. And then, at the very edge of technological possibility, humans begin to capture direct images, faint points of light buried in the glare of their stars. These images are not sharp or colorful, yet they carry a strange emotional weight. For in those moments, humans glimpse another world as an independent object, even if only as a fragile spark. Telescopes such as the Kepler Space Telescope TESS and the James Webb Space Telescope are not merely scientific instruments. They are extensions of the human mind, allowing us to sense what lies beyond our biological perception. Each telescope is a new eye, and also a new way of seeing. At a deeper level, this story touches directly upon the psychology of Carl Gustav Jung. Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Cosmic science seems to do both at once. By looking outward, humans dream of distant worlds and unknown possibilities. But in doing so, we are also forced to look inward at how we perceive, infer, and trust indirect signs. We learn to accept that not all knowledge requires direct contact. Some truths appear only when we are patient enough to listen to what is very subtle. In the context of listening before sleep, this section has a gently calming effect. It slows the rhythm of thought. Science here is no longer a collection of dry numbers, but an art of attention. Attention to a dip in light, to a slight wobble to what is quiet. And just as in sleep, when consciousness loosens its grip, the brain continues to gather, organize, and make meaning from faint signals. This is how humans see planets, not with ordinary vision, but with trust in deeper layers of perception. As you listen to this, you do not need to remember the methods or understand the techniques. Simply feel one gentle truth. You do not need to touch everything to know that it exists. A world can be distant, faint, and silent, and still be real enough to soothe your mind. In the moments before sleep, as darkness gradually fills the room, you too are doing what those telescopes do, learning to see without strong light. And perhaps, in that gentleness, your mind begins to drift more slowly, more lightly, ready to enter its own quiet orbit of rest. When humans learn to see worlds they cannot touch, through shadows, gravitational tremors, and delicate dark lines in light, another door quietly opens. The question is no longer only where planets are or what they look like, but something deeper, slower, and far more fragile. Could something be living there? And if so, would that life resemble anything we have ever known? 7. The possibility of life, but not in Earth's image. Throughout human intellectual history, life has usually been associated with familiar conditions: sunlight, liquid water, oxygen, moderate temperatures. This logic is entirely natural, because we know only one example of life ourselves. But as the universe reveals thousands, then tens of thousands of unfamiliar planets, that template begins to feel narrow. Modern science no longer makes hurried declarations. Instead, it opens possibilities. It allows for the idea that life may hide in places that seem completely incompatible with human intuition. Beneath ice layers tens of kilometers thick, there may exist subsurface oceans warmed not by sunlight but by tidal forces and internal heat. In toxic atmospheres rich in sulfur or methane, slow yet stable chemical cycles may persist. Even within drifting clouds of acid, life, if it exists, may not require a surface land or a fixed place at all. At first, this idea can feel unsettling, but if one listens long enough, it becomes gentle, for it whispers that life is not a formula, but a remarkably flexible possibility. Life may not need light. On Earth itself, deep underground, where sunlight has never reached, microorganisms survive on chemical energy. Life may not need oxygen. Oxygen, after all, is highly corrosive, and for billions of years, life on Earth existed without it. And perhaps life may not even need water, relying instead on other solvents, slower, colder, yet still capable of sustaining structure. What is striking is that signs of life may be extraordinarily subtle. Not forests, not blue oceans, not moving organisms. Sometimes it is only a slight chemical imbalance, a gas ratio that should not persist, a reaction that would collapse unless something were continuously resisting equilibrium. Life in this view is not a form, but a behavior. At a deeper level, this story resonates closely with the psychology of Carl Gustav Jung. Jung once wrote, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct acting from inner necessity." If extraterrestrial life exists, it may not be designed according to human logic or criteria. It may arise from an inner necessity of the universe itself, a quiet creative instinct operating far beyond the language of the human ego. Jung also spoke often about how humans project unconscious images onto the outer world. When we imagine life elsewhere, we may be confronting the limits of how we define living. We are accustomed to shape movement and purpose. But the universe may teach us something else. Life does not need to resemble us in order to be life. This is precisely why this content is so well suited for listening before sleep. It does not force conclusions. It does not ask you to believe or disbelieve. It simply invites you to loosen rigid templates. The question shifts from, "Is there life?" a question that can tense the mind, to "How different could life be?" an open, soft question that does not demand an immediate answer. In the half-awake, half-dreaming state before sleep, the human brain does something similar to cosmic science. It allows ambiguous possibilities to coexist. No verification is required. No categorization is needed. They are simply allowed to drift. And perhaps, in that very moment, you and the universe meet in a quiet place where life does not need a clear definition, and consciousness is permitted to rest within gentle uncertainty. As science gradually accepts that life may exist in forms utterly unfamiliar to Earth, a subtle boundary begins to blur the boundary between searching outward and listening inward. For the moment we allow life to escape familiar templates, we also allow our own minds to open to deeper, older images belonging not to science alone, but to the deepest layers of human consciousness. And there, planets are no longer just celestial bodies. They begin to become mirrors. 8. Worlds as mirrors of the collective unconscious. When human beings look up at the night sky and realize that out there exist thousands, millions of unfamiliar planets, we often believe we are expanding our knowledge of the universe. But on a deeper level, very slow, very quiet, perhaps we are doing something else, projecting the most hidden images of ourselves into infinite space. Carl Gustav Jung called this deeper layer the collective unconscious. He believed that beneath each individual's personal consciousness lies a reservoir of ancient images shared by all humanity. These images do not arise from personal experience, but from the long history of being human. The deep-sea darkness, fire, the abyss, the boundless sky. Jung once wrote a sentence that is very gentle, yet resonates deeply. The collective unconscious contains the whole spiritual heritage of mankind's evolution, born anew in the brain structure of every individual. It is strange, and also very beautiful, that modern science, using tools that are entirely rational, keeps discovering outer worlds whose forms almost perfectly echo these archetypes. Ocean planets without continents where life, if it exists, hides beneath endless layers of water, strongly evoke the archetype of the Great Mother, the Sea Mother. Not the gentle mother of fairy tales, but the primordial mother. Vast, deep, nurturing, and also capable of swallowing everything. This is the image of undifferentiated life, where the ego has not yet separated from the whole. Tidally locked worlds with one side eternally bright and the other eternally dark seem to reflect a familiar psychological structure Jung described as ego and shadow. One part is illuminated, seen and named. The other remains in darkness, not because it is bad, but because it has not yet been touched by consciousness. As Jung famously said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. And then there are the wandering planets without a parent star, drifting freely through cold space. They evoke a feeling that is difficult to name, like parts of the psyche that have been cut off from the center of consciousness, fragments of memory, emotion, and instinct once pushed outside the orbit of what is considered normal. Not wrong, not bad, just alone. And their very existence reminds us that within each human being there are such wandering worlds as well. What matters is not whether these planets truly resemble our unconscious images. What matters is what they awaken within us. Jung believed that when an external symbol touches the right internal structure, it creates a deep sense of familiarity, a recognition that requires no explanation. Perhaps this is why contemplating distant planets has such a soothing effect before sleep. Not because it makes us understand more, but because it makes the ego smaller. When the ego no longer clings to the center, the mind begins to relax. Images no longer need to be controlled. They are allowed to drift as they do in dreams. And perhaps in the moment you listen to these distant worlds before sleep, you are not truly leaving Earth. You are moving inward into the same inner space that human beings have entered every night for thousands of years. A space where the outer universe and the inner universe reflect one another slowly, peacefully, without demanding answers. As planets gradually appear as mirrors of the collective unconscious, a very subtle shift begins to occur in the observer's mind. We no longer see the universe merely as an external object to be measured, classified, or conquered. We begin to be seen in return. And in that moment when outer symbols touch deep inner structures, a quiet question arises. If the universe is so vast, if there are so many ways of existing, then where does I truly belong? That question does not cause anxiety. Instead, it opens a very slow, very gentle relief. And from there, the journey of releasing the central position begins. 9. When the universe teaches humans to let go of the center, for much of history, humans lived within a single coherent story. We were the center. Earth stood at the center of the universe. The sun revolved around us. The order of the heavens existed to serve human life. Even as science gradually dismantled these models, their psychological echoes lingered. We still tend to treat our experience as the norm, our life as the measure, our worries as the core of meaning. But each newly discovered planet, especially those that resemble nothing familiar, quietly loosens that story. Not through harsh denial, not by declaring that humans are nothing, but in another way entirely, by expanding the frame until the ego naturally becomes smaller. A planet so hot that metal evaporates. A world without day or night. A planetary system with tilted, reversed, chaotic orbits. None of these planets care whether humans understand them. And that vast indifference is strangely healing. For it reminds us the universe does not operate against us, nor does it operate for us, it simply operates. Carl Gustav Jung believed that true psychological maturity begins when the ego relinquishes its ambition to stand at the center of the entire psychic life. He wrote, "The self is not only the center, but also the whole circumference, which embraces both conscious and unconscious. It is the center of this totality." This distinction is essential. Jung did not say that the ego must be erased. He said the ego must recognize itself as only one part of a much larger structure, the self. And when this recognition occurs, a subtle shift follows. Tension softens, the need for control eases, and the mind gains space to rest. In this sense, the universe does exactly what a skilled therapist does. It does not argue with the ego. It does not force the ego to admit error. It simply widens the context until the ego realizes on its own that it no longer needs to strain. When we understand that Earth is just one possibility among countless others, we do not become meaningless. On the contrary, we become lighter. Lighter because we no longer have to carry the entire meaning of existence. Lighter because we no longer have to prove that everything revolves around us. Lighter because we are allowed to be a part, no more, no less. And this feeling has a deep connection to sleep. Insomnia often does not arise from lack of fatigue, but from the ego's refusal to let go. It keeps thinking, evaluating, planning, protecting, worrying, as if the world would collapse if it stopped. But the universe, through its silent vastness, whispers something else. Everything continues, even when you rest. As you lie there listening to distant planets, ancient star systems, worlds that have never known humanity, you are practicing a very ancient form of letting go. You allow yourself to not be the center for a few hours, and in that space, sleep can gently arrive. There is no need to understand everything, no need to remember, no need to keep yourself awake. Simply allow your mind to drift into a larger order, where you are permitted to become smaller, quieter, and safer. When the ego grows tired enough to step away from the center, when the mind no longer insists on standing in the middle of the universe to explain everything, something very natural happens. A return. Not a retreat born of fear, but a return born of having gone far enough to understand that not everything needs to be conquered. Some places only need to be accompanied. And after a long journey through worlds that are harsh, strange, frozen, or burning at extremes, Earth begins to appear differently, not as the only home, but as a place gentle enough to rest. 10. Returning to Earth, a rare world gentle enough to lull us to sleep. After the mind has wandered through planets hotter than stars where metal evaporates into clouds, through tidally locked worlds where day and night never meet, through wandering planets without a parent star, drifting silently in eternal darkness, Earth no longer appears as the center of the universe. It appears as a rare exception of balance, not too hot, not too cold, not too bright, not permanently submerged in darkness. A world where day and night alternate not to dominate one another, but to complete one another. A place where light does not stretch itself to exhaustion, and darkness does not swallow everything whole. It is precisely this alternation, steady, slow, unhurried, that creates the conditions for life not only to exist, but to learn how to adapt. Earth has time. Not the frantic time of orbits that last only hours, nor the cold prolongation of thousands of years for a single revolution. Time here is slow enough for organisms to learn their biological rhythms, stable enough for memory to accumulate, and gentle enough that mistakes do not mean extinction. In Jung's language, it is a space where individuation, the process of becoming oneself, can unfold without being torn apart by extremes. Carl Gustav Jung once wrote, "The creation of something new is not accomplished by the intellect, but by the play instinct, acting from inner necessity." Life on Earth, like the human psyche, does not develop through coercion or cold optimization. It develops through rhythm, through pauses, through repetition that is safe enough for something new to take root. And sleep is one of the deepest expressions of that rhythm. In sleep, the human brain does something very similar to the way Earth functions in its day-night cycle. It releases rigid structures. It temporarily suspends linear logic. It allows images to drift, memories to be reorganized, emotions to be processed without the ego's interference. Jung described this as the moment when the unconscious is allowed to speak in its own language, symbols, images, sensations that are vague yet deeply meaningful. Dreams are the guiding words of the soul, Jung once wrote. As you prepare to drift into sleep, you are not switching off. You are entering a mode of operation older than civilization, older than science, even older than the cosmic models we have just explored. You are participating in the rhythm of rest and renewal, the rhythm that has allowed life to persist on this planet for billions of years. And perhaps what makes Earth gentle enough to lull us to sleep lies not only in liquid water, the atmosphere, or a stable moon. Perhaps it lies in this: it is a world that allows us not to be awake all the time. It allows darkness to arrive when it should. It allows fatigue without calling it failure. It allows letting go without the fear of falling apart. As you lie still, listening to your breath slow down, you are not leaving the universe. You are merging with one of its most subtle movements, a movement that does not produce blinding light storms or collisions, but produces restoration. And so, if your eyelids begin to feel heavy, if thoughts become fragmented, if images start to drift freely, let it happen. You do not need to keep yourself awake any longer. The universe is wide enough. Earth is safe enough. And your mind in this moment is allowed to rest. I wish you a very deep sleep. A sleep as gentle as the breathing of this planet itself. After a long journey across the strange worlds of the universe, blazing planets, realms without dawn, orbits that last thousands of years, and structures beyond imagination, perhaps the most profound thing is not what we have seen, but what inside us has slowed down. When the human mind quietly observes the infinite diversity of planets, something subtle begins to happen. The ego, so accustomed to placing itself at the center of every story, gradually loosens its grip. We no longer need to understand everything. We no longer need to control. We no longer need to define everything with sharp boundaries. The universe, in a very gentle way, teaches us that not everything needs to be held. Some things only need to be felt. Carl Gustav Jung said that the journey of psychological maturity is not about expanding the power of consciousness, but about learning to listen to the deeper layers of oneself. And perhaps listening to the universe with its slow rhythm, vast order, and meaningful silence is also a way of listening to our own unconscious. Images of deep oceans, darkness, fire, infinite skies do not exist only out there. They have always lived within the structure of the human mind. When we see tidally locked planets, one side bright, one side dark, we suddenly recognize a familiar structure within ourselves: consciousness and darkness, ego and shadow, always existing together. When we learn about wandering planets without a parent star, we touch the feeling of disorientation that has appeared in our own lives. And when we return to Earth, a world not perfect but sufficiently balanced, we understand that life does not need extremes to be meaningful. Earth does not lull us to sleep with spectacle. It lulls us with rhythm. Day comes and goes. Night falls and retreats. Tides rise and fall. Creatures wake and rest. And within that cycle, human sleep is not an empty gap, but an essential part of the planet's functioning. When you close your eyes, the brain enters its own private universe. It releases the rigid structures of the day, allows memories to reorganize, emotions to be processed, and wordless images to pass through. Dreams do not need to be logical. Like the universe, they do not exist to explain, they exist to balance. Perhaps by now you no longer remember every planet mentioned in this story, and that is perfectly fine. What matters most is not memory, but the sense of softening spreading through your body. Slower breathing, looser shoulders, thoughts no longer chasing one another so urgently. You do not need to try to sleep. You do not need to try to let go. You only need to allow. Allow darkness to arrive like a familiar friend. Allow fatigue to rest. Allow yourself not to be the center of anything for a moment. The universe continues to move, whether you are awake or asleep. Planets keep turning, stars keep burning, distant worlds continue their histories. You no longer need to follow. Your part right now is simply to rest. And so, as this story comes to a close, let it fade like the last light of dusk. No conclusion is needed. No further thinking is required. Just lie still, listening to your breath blend with the ancient breathing of this planet. I wish you a very deep sleep. A peaceful sleep where you are safe, released, and gently return to the quietest part of yourself. Good night.